Every major financial crisis in history leaves behind the same footprint: more authority in the hands of fewer people. It happened when Rome tightened its tax system after endless wars. It happened when medieval kingdoms seized grain and gold during famine. And it happened again when modern nations built central banks, created surveillance networks, and turned SWIFT into a geopolitical weapon. The pattern is ancient, but the tools are not. Today's architecture of control is no longer physical or bureaucratic. It is digital, silent, and almost invisible. Digital IDs, programmable CBDCs, and algorithmic sanction engines form the newest layer systems that can identify, approve, limit, or deny participation with a few lines of code. Most people see these as separate innovations, but they are converging into a single, unified grid. And the timing is not random. Inflation spikes, sovereign debt, crises, global wars, and the slow erosion of the dollar's dominance have all arrived together. These pressures don't weaken governments. They justify stronger control. We are already inside the system. Most simply, haven't noticed. And to understand how it works, we need to look at the historical pattern it always follows. History rarely repeats in detail, but its structure never changes. First comes the crisis. Then comes the promise of protection. And finally comes the consolidation of power that never fully disappears. After World War I shattered Europe, nations turned to centralized banking as the supposed cure for chaos. During the Great Depression, the United States confiscated gold framed as a temporary necessity, yet the precedent of government control over private wealth remained. After 9/11, surveillance expanded under the banner of national security, and the emergency measures quietly became permanent architecture. The 2008 collapse led to coordinated global banking oversight, binding nations to shared systems they could never easily exit. And in 2020, digital tracking and emergency powers spread faster than the virus itself. Each moment felt unique, yet the sequence was identical: crisis, consolidation, control. This isn't new what's. New is the technology. Today's tools are faster, quieter, and far more precise. And the first pillar of this new control grid begins with something deceptively simple: your identity going digital. Digital identity is being sold as the next great convenience, a single key for banking, healthcare, travel, and government services. But history shows that identification systems never stop at convenience. In China, the early foundations of the social credit system began as simple ID-linked records, gradually expanding into a nationwide behavioral score. In India, Aadhaar was introduced as a voluntary identity program. Within years, it became mandatory for bank accounts, welfare, mobile phones, even school admissions. The European Union now pushes a digital identity wallet designed to unify citizens' data under one interoperable standard. And across Africa, digital IDs tied to humanitarian aid quietly determine who receives food, medicine, or access to markets. The pattern is unmistakable. Whoever controls identity controls participation. Work, savings, travel, medical treatment, everything becomes dependent on a database. And once identity becomes digital, permissions become programmable. Access can be granted, limited, or revoked automatically. You can participate only if your data is compliant. Digital ID is the gatekeeper. Everything else plugs into it. And the next layer of this architecture, money itself, will make that gate even harder to pass without permission. Central bank digital currencies are often described as a modern version of cash, but the comparison is misleading. Cash is anonymous, universal, and permanent. CBDCs are programmable, traceable, and revocable. Their power rests on three quiet capabilities. Programmability means money can be restricted to certain locations, items, or time periods. It can function for groceries, but not for travel, or for fuel, but not for savings. Expiration allows unused balances to disappear automatically, pushing citizens to spend exactly as policymakers intend. And control, the most chilling feature, lets authorities freeze, limit, or redirect funds with a single command. None of this is theoretical. History is filled with manual versions of the same idea. Soviet-era ruble restrictions that trapped citizens inside the system. India's 2016 demonetization that erased savings overnight. Greece's 2015 capital controls that locked depositors out of their own accounts. But those measures required manpower, paperwork, and political drama. CBDCs require only code. The World Bank and the BIS openly state that CBDCs will integrate seamlessly with national digital IDs, merging identity with money into a unified system. The switch can be flipped instantly, and once money becomes programmable, global sanctions gain a new and unprecedented force. Sanctions were once the slowest weapon in international politics, debated in parliaments, negotiated in back rooms, enforced over months. Today, they operate at the speed of code. When Iran was disconnected from SWIFT, its entire banking system went dark overnight, proving that a nation could be financially erased without a single shot fired. When Russia lost access to $300 billion in foreign reserves, the world witnessed something unprecedented. A nuclear superpower stripped of its savings through digital keys held outside its borders. And it isn't only nations. Individuals are now blacklisted globally, unable to open accounts, move money, or conduct basic transactions across dozens of countries. What began as diplomacy has become an automated enforcement machine. Sanctions were the beta test for programmable money. They reveal that financial isolation is not only possible, but efficient, and that the power to disconnect is more potent than the power to invade. This was the first version. CBDCs will be version 2.0. Transforming global sanction logic into domestic, individual-level control. And when these systems merge, the grid becomes fully operational. For the first time in history, three once-separate systems are being wired together into a single architecture of control. Digital ID determines who you are. CBDC determines how you spend. And sanctioned algorithms determine what is allowed. Alone, each tool is powerful. Combined, they create something unprecedented, a programmable system that can approve, deny, or limit a person's participation in economic life with perfect precision. A sanction no longer needs to target a nation. It can target an individual citizen, a neighborhood, or a dissenting group, all with the same digital switch. The emerging framework is already visible. Global institutions are designing unified digital identity standards that sync across borders. Central banks are building interoperability layers so CBDCs can communicate instantly with one another. Compliance engines once used only for banks are being upgraded into algorithmic rule systems that check transactions in real time against political, social, or environmental criteria. The pieces already exist. They are simply waiting to be connected. This is the moment the pattern becomes unmistakable. The grid isn't theoretical, and it isn't future tense. It's built. Activation is the last step. And history shows that activation always arrives during crises. Every control system waits for its moment. And throughout history, that moment has always been crises. A severe debt collapse could force governments into currency resets, making programmable money appear as the only orderly solution. Major bank failures could push citizens toward state-backed digital accounts, framed as safer than private institutions. Civil unrest or political fragmentation could justify identity-linked financial monitoring to keep extremism in check. Energy or food disruptions could lead to rationing enforced through programmable currencies. An escalating geopolitical conflict could normalize global financial controls in the name of national security. In these moments, public resistance collapses. People trade autonomy for stability, privacy for protection, freedom for the promise of normalcy. We saw the pattern unfold in 2020 when emergency powers normalized digital oversight almost overnight. Measures described as temporary quietly became infrastructure. Today, the triggers are aligning: again debt war, inflation, resource strain, political division. We are closer to activation than at any point in modern history. And once activated, the system will reshape everyday life with a precision previous empires could only dream of. Life inside the grid wouldn't feel dramatic at first. It would feel efficient, seamless, almost convenient. But beneath the smooth surface, a new economic reality would begin to take shape. Purchases could be denied automatically, not by a human, but by a silent rule embedded in your profile. Travel could be restricted if your digital compliance score slipped below a threshold. Social or political dissent might not lead to arrest only, to financial quieting, where transfers fail, benefits pause, or your spending limits shrink. Programmable carbon allowances could decide how often you drive, heat your home, or buy meat. Access to loans, savings, or even medical services could become determined by algorithms measuring responsible behavior. None of this is speculative. These ideas appear openly in central bank and policy papers, and such systems rarely begin with punishments. They begin with incentives, discounts, faster processing, priority lanes until opting in becomes the only practical choice. The early version will feel normal until it doesn't, and by then, the moral question becomes impossible to ignore. In the end, the real conflict is not between citizens and technology, but between freedom and the ancient instinct of power to centralize itself. Tools evolve, empires change, currencies rise and fall, yet the pattern remains constant. No society loses its liberty in a single dramatic moment. It happens slowly, through conveniences accepted, permissions granted, and lines crossed quietly. Every empire believed its controls were temporary, necessary, or harmless. Every generation told itself the same comforting phrase: "It won the penitor." But history has never honored that belief. The systems built in times of crisis rarely disappear when the crisis fades. They harden into structure, they become the new normal. And once a financial control grid is activated, reversing it becomes nearly impossible. That is why recognizing the pattern matters. Understanding how these tools merge, how crises accelerate their use, and how easily comfort can replace caution is the first defense any society has. The warning is not meant to provoke fear, but clarity. Freedom is not lost through force alone. It is lost when people stop noticing the drift, and the drift has already begun.